Ma'am, please step aside. The voice cut clean through the low hum of Gate B2. The line froze. Eyes turned. Two security officers shifted near the counter, just enough to remind her she was being watched. Danielle Carter didn't move. She held her first-class boarding pass steady in her hand, the paper catching the thin light spilling through the glass walls. She didn't look like power, just a woman in a black blazer, a worn leather tote, and the kind of calm that unsettles people who expect an apology. The gate agent, Sharon, according to her badge, looked her up and down. "Are you sure you're at the right gate?" The words were smooth, professional, but the chill beneath them was unmistakable. A man behind her muttered something about wrong class. Someone raised a phone to record. Danielle smiled. "I'm sure." The silence thickened. The sunlight sharpened. The soft beep of the scanner vanished into something like anticipation. She said nothing more. She didn't have to. There was something in her stillness that made even the air hesitate, as if the world itself was waiting to see what she'd do next. If you were Danielle Carter, staring down judgment, questioned for simply existing where you belong, what would you do? Stay quiet, fight back, or smile like she did? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I want to know, what would make your world stop and listen? Danielle stepped into the priority boarding area with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from years of navigating spaces where she wasn't expected. She wore no jewelry except for a simple watch, no designer labels screaming wealth. Her navy slacks and white blouse could have belonged to anyone, a teacher, a consultant, a traveler who'd saved for months to afford the upgrade. That was intentional. She'd learned long ago that real power didn't announce itself. Sharon took the boarding pass, her fingers barely grazing Danielle's hand as if contact might transfer something undesirable. She scanned the barcode. The system beeped green, valid, paid, confirmed. But Sharon's eyes narrowed. She tilted the pass toward the light, examining it like a customs agent inspecting a suspicious passport. "This ticket," Sharon said slowly, her voice loud enough to catch the attention of the businessman standing behind Danielle. "Where did you purchase it?" "Through the airline's official app," Danielle replied, her tone even. "Is there a problem?" Sharon didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned to her colleague, a younger woman with blonde hair pulled into a tight ponytail, and murmured something that Danielle couldn't quite catch. The colleague leaned in, glanced at Danielle, then at the boarding pass, then back at Danielle. Her expression mirrored Sharon's skepticism. Around them, the boarding process continued without pause. A white couple in their 60s approached the counter to Sharon's left. The male agent greeted them with a warm smile, scanned their passes in seconds, and waved them through with a friendly, "Enjoy your flight to LA." No questions, no scrutiny, no second glances. Danielle noticed. She always noticed. "Ma'am," Sharon said, straightening up, "we need to verify some information. This will just take a moment." It was the way she said it. Not as an apology, but as a statement of fact, as if Danielle's presence itself was the irregularity that needed correcting. Behind Danielle, the businessman shifted his weight, checking his Rolex with visible impatience. Sharon ignored him entirely, her focus locked on Danielle with the intensity of someone who'd already made up her mind about what kind of person stood before her. Danielle set her tote on the floor and folded her hands in front of her. She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply waited, her face a mask of professional calm, while Sharon typed something into her computer with deliberate slowness. The seconds stretched. Other passengers breezed past the adjacent counters, their paths unobstructed, their legitimacy never questioned. The younger colleague whispered something else to Sharon. They both looked at Danielle again, this time with expressions that suggested they were doing everyone a favor by being thorough. In their eyes, Danielle could see the unspoken assumption. People like her didn't belong in first class unless someone else had paid for it, unless there'd been a mistake, unless the system had failed. She'd seen this look before, in boardrooms, in country clubs, in hotels where she'd arrived for business meetings and been mistaken for staff. The look that said, "We don't believe you earned this." Danielle took a slow breath and kept her expression neutral. But inside, behind the careful composure, something else was taking shape. Not anger, not yet, but awareness. The kind of awareness that comes from recognizing a pattern, from understanding that what was happening to her in this moment was happening to countless others in countless airports, stores, and offices across the country. She glanced at her watch. 8 minutes until boarding closed. Sharon was still typing, her fingers moving across the keyboard with theatrical precision, as if she were uncovering evidence of a crime, rather than processing a routine first-class ticket. "Is there something specific you need from me?" Danielle asked, her voice quiet but clear. Sharon looked up, her smile tight. "Just following protocol, ma'am. We have to be careful these days." Protocol. The word hung in the air like an accusation dressed up as policy. Sharon looked up from her screen, expression hardened. She picked up the desk phone and pressed a button, eyes never leaving Danielle. "Rick, can you come to Gate B2? I need a supervisor override." Danielle's pulse remained steady, but her awareness sharpened. An override for a valid ticket. The businessman behind her exhaled loudly, but Sharon remained focused on Danielle, as if she were the only problem that needed solving. "While we wait for my supervisor," Sharon said, voice taking on rehearsed quality, "I'll need additional identification. Passport, credit card, and purchase receipt." "I showed ID when I checked my bag," Danielle replied calmly, but she reached into her tote, retrieving her passport and credit card, placing them on the counter with careful precision. The confirmation was digital. Sharon examined the passport photo with exaggerated attention, holding it up and comparing it to Danielle's face, as if searching for forgery. Danielle stood still, allowing the scrutiny, her face betraying nothing. A man in his early 40s approached. Rick, according to his supervisor badge. He had the bearing of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Sharon immediately launched into explanation, voice low but urgent. "This passenger's ticket needs verification before boarding." Rick turned to Danielle, his eyes making the same assessment journey. Face, clothes, bag. His conclusion apparently reached before he'd heard the full story. "Ma'am, can you walk me through how you acquired this ticket?" "I purchased it 6 weeks ago through your airline's app," Danielle said evenly. "I received confirmation immediately. I checked in online this morning. Everything has been standard. And you're certain no one else purchased this on your behalf? No employer, no family member, no—" He paused. "Benefactor." The implication landed like a slap. Danielle's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "I purchased the ticket myself, with my own money, for my own travel." Rick exchanged a glance with Sharon, a look that said they were thinking the same thing. Around them, other passengers boarded without incident. A young white woman in yoga pants walked past, ticket scanned without question. A family of 4 received warm smiles and quick service. "We've had issues with fraudulent tickets recently," Rick said, leaning against the counter. "People buying them with stolen cards or through unauthorized third parties. We have to protect the integrity of our boarding process." "I understand processes," Danielle replied, meeting his eyes directly. "What I'm trying to understand is why this particular process seems to be applied selectively." The question hung in the air. Rick's expression flickered with something that might have been recognition or defensiveness, but it passed quickly. "Ma'am, I assure you, we treat every passenger with equal scrutiny." Danielle finished softly, pointedly. "Because from where I'm standing, that doesn't appear to be the case." The businessman spoke up. "Look, I don't mean to interrupt, but some of us have connections to make. If her ticket's valid, can we move this along?" Rick shot him an irritated glance. "Sir, we're handling a security matter. Please be patient." Security matter. The words transformed discrimination into something that sounded official, necessary, justified. Danielle pulled out her phone, showing the digital receipt with timestamp, confirmation number, and credit card charge. She turned the screen toward Rick. "Here's the receipt. Everything is documented." Rick barely glanced. "Anyone can fake an email, ma'am." There it was, the inevitable endpoint of manufactured suspicion. No amount of proof would be sufficient because the doubt had never been about evidence. Danielle lowered her phone and took a small step back. She was no longer simply a passenger trying to board. She was a woman cataloging a pattern, documenting a violation, preparing for something these people hadn't yet considered possible. "I'll wait for whatever verification you need to complete," Danielle said quietly, her voice carrying a new quality. Not defeat, but decision. Rick nodded, satisfied. Thank you for your cooperation. This won't take long. As he turned away, Danielle added one more thing, measured and clear. I want to make sure we're documenting this interaction properly, for both our sakes. Rick paused, glanced back with flickering uncertainty, then continued. He had no idea what she meant. Not yet. Rick returned with a tablet and an expression suggesting he'd found validation for his suspicions. He set it on the counter with deliberate emphasis. Ms. Carter, I've reviewed your reservation, and there are irregularities preventing us from allowing you to board. What irregularities? Danielle asked, her voice calm but eyes sharpening. The purchase pattern doesn't match our typical first-class customer profile, Rick said smoothly. Last-minute upgrade, single traveler, no corporate account. It raises red flags in our fraud detection system. He'd transformed a legitimate purchase into statistical anomaly, made her autonomy sound like evidence of wrongdoing. Danielle knew what he wasn't saying. First-class tickets belong to a certain type of person, and she didn't fit that profile. I purchased the ticket 6 weeks ago, Danielle corrected, voice taking on an edge. That's hardly last minute. And since when is being a single traveler suspicious? Sharon interjected, tone dripping false concern. We're just trying to protect you, ma'am. Identity theft is serious. If someone used your information fraudulently, you'd want us to catch it, wouldn't you? The paternalism was worse than outright discrimination, the suggestion they were doing her a favor by treating her like a criminal. Around them, passengers had gathered. Danielle felt the weight of their attention, how public scrutiny amplified humiliation. My identity hasn't been stolen, Danielle said, composure holding but fraying. What's been stolen is my time, my dignity, and my right to travel without interrogation. Rick's jaw tightened. Ma'am, there's no need for dramatics. We're following policy that seems to exclusively target people who look like me, Danielle interrupted, voice rising just enough to carry. Several heads turned. A teenager with her phone out started recording. I provided every piece of documentation. My ticket is valid. My ID matches. My payment went through. So tell me, what policy requires you to assume I'm a fraud? The word hung in the air, fraud, and with it, all the coded language suddenly became explicit. This wasn't about procedure. This was about the color of her skin and the assumptions that came with it. Sharon stepped forward, voice lowering. Perhaps it would be easier if you considered rebooking an economy. We have seats available and it would avoid all this confusion. Confusion. As if Danielle were the source of the problem. As if accepting a lesser seat would smooth over discrimination rather than accommodate it. Danielle stood perfectly still, breathing controlled. She thought about escalating, demanding to speak higher up the chain. But she'd played this scene before, and she knew how it ended. With her exhausted, them unmoved, the system unchanged. Instead, she pulled out her phone and opened the camera. She photographed her boarding pass, then Rick's badge, then Sharon's. The shutter clicks were audible in the tense silence. "What are you doing?" Rick demanded, composure cracking. "Documenting," Danielle replied simply. "Since you're so concerned about policy, I'm sure you won't mind having a record of how it's applied." Rick's face flushed. "You can't just—" "I can," Danielle said, voice quiet but absolute. "This is a public space. These are public employees of a publicly traded company, and this violates about half a dozen federal anti-discrimination statutes." The mention of legal language shifted Rick's demeanor. He looked uncertain, glancing at Sharon for guidance. But Sharon was equally off balance. Danielle continued, tone shifting to something suggesting she knew more than she'd been letting on. "These protocols you're citing? They disproportionately affect passengers of color. They target people based on subjective assessments rather than objective criteria, and they exist primarily as justification for decisions already made based on bias." "Now wait," Rick started, but Danielle wasn't finished. "I've been patient. I've complied with every request. I've provided every piece of evidence. But what's clear is that no amount of proof will satisfy you, because this was never about verification. This was about putting me in what you consider my place." The gate area had gone quiet. The teenager recording had her phone angled directly at the scene. Other passengers had devices out too. This moment was being captured from multiple angles, preserved for scrutiny beyond this time and place. Sharon tried once more, voice pleading. Ma'am, we don't, this isn't about. Don't, Danielle said softly, cutting her off. Don't insult both of us by pretending you don't know exactly what this is about. She took a breath, composing herself, then did something Rick and Sharon didn't expect. She pulled up her contacts, scrolled to a name, and placed a call. The phone rang twice before someone picked up. Madison, Danielle said clearly, loud enough for Rick and Sharon to hear. I need you to convene an emergency board meeting. Gate B2, Terminal C. I need to address management decisions affecting brand reputation and customer relations. Madison's response was inaudible, but Danielle nodded. Yes, immediately. Conference them in now. She ended the call and looked back at Rick and Sharon, expression unchanged. You wanted to talk about policy. Let's talk about it with the people who actually write the policies. Rick's face had gone pale. Sharon looked confused, uncertain what had just happened. Around them, the crowd had grown larger, sensing something significant unfolding, something beyond a simple dispute about a boarding pass. Danielle didn't explain. She didn't threaten. She simply stood there, waiting, her dignity intact despite every attempt to strip it away. And in that waiting, in that refusal to be diminished, she became something more than a passenger. The question that would haunt them later wasn't whether they'd been wrong. It was whether they'd ever considered that the person they were humiliating might have the power to ensure it never happened again. These protocols seemed designed to target one specific type of passenger. But did they know who they were really dealing with? Rick stared at Danielle, trying to process what had just happened. The phone call, the mention of a board meeting, but his pride wouldn't allow him to believe this woman could actually have the authority she was implying. Ma'am, he said, voice hardening, I don't know who you think you called, but making threats won't change our security protocols. If anything, this behavior raises additional concerns. He turned to Sharon. Call airport security. We need someone to escort this passenger out of the priority boarding area. She's becoming disruptive. The word disruptive was a weapon. Danielle hadn't raised her voice beyond making herself heard. She hadn't touched anyone. But in Rick's narrative, her refusal to accept humiliation quietly made her the aggressor. Sharon picked up the phone, fingers trembling as she dialed. Around them, the crowd had swelled. Some passengers looked uncomfortable. Others seemed riveted, phones out, capturing every moment. Danielle remained where she stood, her tote at her feet, boarding pass still in hand. She didn't move toward the gate. She simply existed in the space she had every right to occupy. And somehow that existence had become an act of defiance. 2 airport security officers appeared within 3 minutes, a tall man and a shorter woman, both in dark uniforms. The male officer's expression was professionally neutral. The female officer scanned the situation with quick assessment. What's the situation? The male officer asked Rick. Rick launched into explanation, carefully curated to paint himself as reasonable and Danielle as problematic. This passenger has a questionable ticket. We asked for verification, and she became confrontational. She's refusing to cooperate and disrupting the boarding process. The female officer turned to Danielle. Ma'am, do you have your identification and boarding documents? Danielle handed them over without argument. The officer examined them, scanning the boarding pass with a handheld device. The device beeped green, valid, confirmed, legitimate. These documents appear to be in order, the female officer said, looking at Rick questioningly. The ticket may be technically valid, Rick insisted, but the circumstances surrounding its purchase are suspicious. We have protocols for situations like this, and we're within our rights to deny boarding based on security concerns. The male officer looked between Rick and Danielle, clearly trying to determine what was really happening. Sir, if the ticket is valid and her documents check out, I'm not sure what security concern you're referring to. Has she made any threats? Shown any signs of intoxication or instability? She's been recording us, Sharon interjected, pointing at Danielle's phone as if it were evidence of wrongdoing. Taking pictures of our badges, making phone calls. It's intimidating. The female officer actually laughed. A short, sharp sound she quickly suppressed. Ma'am, passengers have the right to document their interactions with airline staff, especially if they feel they're being treated unfairly. That's not a security violation. Rick's face flushed deeper. He was losing control of the narrative. I want her removed from this gate area. If she wants to file a complaint, she can do it through proper channels. But right now, she's preventing us from doing our jobs. A voice cut through the tension. A black woman in her 30s wearing business attire. Excuse me, but I've been standing here the whole time, and I didn't see her do anything disruptive. She answered your questions. She showed her documents. What exactly did she do wrong besides not accept being treated like a criminal? Several passengers murmured agreement. A white man in a suit spoke up. I flew first class last week, and nobody asked me half the questions you're asking her. This doesn't look like standard procedure. Rick whirled on them. This doesn't concern you. Please step back. But the businessman behind Danielle wasn't having it. Actually, it does concern us, because if you're applying different standards based on how someone looks, that affects all of us. The woman in business attire pulled out her phone and started recording. I'm a lawyer, she announced, and what I'm witnessing looks like racial profiling. I'd be happy to provide my contact information as a witness if this passenger wants to pursue legal action. Sharon looked panicked, glancing between Rick and the growing crowd who were no longer passive observers but active participants. Rick tried to reassert dominance. Everyone needs to calm down. This is an airline matter, not a public forum. It's a public space, someone called out, and we're the public. An elderly white woman with silver hair spoke up. Young man, I've been flying for 40 years, and I've never seen anyone treated this way over a valid ticket. You should be ashamed. The male security officer held up his hands. Okay, everyone, let's take a breath. Ma'am, he addressed Danielle, are you willing to step aside and allow us to sort this out? Danielle nodded. I'm happy to cooperate. I've been cooperating from the beginning. What I'm not willing to do is accept discrimination as if it's normal procedure. This isn't discrimination, Rick started. Then what is it? The lawyer cut in. Because you stopped a black woman with a valid first-class ticket and subjected her to interrogation you didn't apply to white passengers. That fits the legal definition of discriminatory treatment pretty precisely. The crowd had grown to more than 50 people, blocking traffic through the gate area. Other airline employees approached to see what was happening. A supervisor from a different gate, Patricia, pushed through. What's going on here? Patricia demanded. Sharon interrupted Rick, voice rising with defensive panic. This passenger purchased a suspicious ticket, and when we tried to verify it, she became hostile and started recording us. Then she made some threatening phone call, and now all these people are harassing us for doing our jobs. Patricia turned to the security officers. What's your assessment? The female officer spoke carefully. The passenger's documents are valid. She hasn't violated any laws or regulations. The airline staff requested we remove her, but we don't have legal grounds unless they're formally denying her boarding, which requires documentation. Are you denying her boarding? Patricia asked Rick. Rick hesitated. Denying boarding came with paperwork, liability, and potential federal scrutiny. But backing down now in front of all these witnesses would be admitting his rationale had been baseless. Before he could answer, Gerald appeared, the gate manager, silver-haired and polished. He took one look at the scene, the crowd, security officers, phones recording, and his expression shifted from confusion to alarm. Someone want to tell me why we have a mob at Gate B2? Rick jumped at the chance. Sir, we have a passenger with a fraudulent ticket situation. The ticket isn't fraudulent, the female officer interrupted. We've verified it. Gerald looked at Danielle, his eyes making the same assessment. But Gerald had more experience reading situations, and what he saw wasn't just a problematic passenger. He saw cameras, witnesses, and potential viral disaster. Ma'am, he said to Danielle, tone attempting conciliation, I apologize for any confusion. Perhaps we can resolve this more quietly. If you'd step into our office. No, Danielle said simply. Whatever needs to be said can be said here in front of these witnesses. I'm not going anywhere private where the only record will be your word against mine. Gerald's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to passengers who understood power dynamics this clearly. I'm trying to help you. If you want to help me, Danielle replied, voice carrying across the now silent gate area, Then tell your employees to process my valid ticket and let me board, or formally deny me boarding and provide the documentation required by federal law. Those are your two options. The teenager who'd been recording spoke up. This is already at 40,000 views. People are watching this live. Gerald's face went pale. Live streaming, viral potential, corporate liability. This had moved beyond a gate dispute into something that could damage the airline's reputation and stock price. He turned to Rick and Sharon with barely controlled fury. Both of you, my office, after this flight departs. Then to Danielle. Ms. Carter, Danielle Carter. Ms. Carter, on behalf of the airline, I apologize for this incident. Your boarding is approved. But it was too late for simple apologies. Danielle stood her ground and said something that made Gerald's blood run cold. Mr. Gerald, I appreciate the attempt at resolution. But I need to ask you something. In the past month, how many white passengers with valid first-class tickets have been subjected to this level of scrutiny at this gate? Gerald didn't answer. He couldn't. Because everyone there knew the answer was 0. Danielle continued, voice steady. I've been traveling for business for 15 years. I've been stopped, questioned, subjected to random additional screening more times than I can count. I've watched white colleagues breeze through the same processes I'm forced to prove my way through, and every time I'm told it's policy, it's procedure, it's random, it's anything except what it actually is. She looked at Rick, then Sharon, then Gerald. What happened here today isn't an isolated incident. It's a pattern. It's a system, and I'm done pretending it's anything else. The gate area was silent except for distant announcements, rolling luggage, the hum of air conditioning. Everyone was watching, waiting. Danielle took a slow breath and made a decision that would change everything. Madison, she said into her phone, which had been on the entire time. Are you still there? A voice came through the speaker, audible to those standing close. I'm here. The board members are conferenced in. They've heard everything. Gerald's face went gray. Rick and Sharon looked at each other with dawning horror. The crowd stirred with confused whispers. What board? What members? Danielle looked directly at Gerald. I didn't come here looking for a confrontation. I came to catch a flight. But what happened here today, what happens every day to passengers who look like me, that needs to change. And since polite requests for dignity haven't worked, maybe accountability will. The seconds that followed felt suspended. Gerald stood frozen. Rick's face shifted from anger to confusion. Sharon gripped the counter, knuckles white. Danielle waited, phone in hand, Madison's voice barely audible. The crowd had gone utterly silent. Madison, Danielle said quietly, can you confirm who's on the line? Madison's voice came through clearly. I have the Vice President of Operations, the CFO, and 3 board members conferenced in. They've been listening for the past 8 minutes. 8 minutes. They'd heard everything. Rick's accusations, Sharon's suggestion to move to economy, Gerald's attempt to contain it privately. They'd heard the lawyer identify racial profiling. They'd heard Danielle's devastating summary of systemic discrimination. Gerald's phone rang. He looked at the screen and went pale. With shaking hands, he answered, This is Gerald. The voice was loud enough for several people to hear. Male, authoritative, furious. Mr. Gerald, this is Kenneth Morrison, VP of Operations. Tell me what the hell is happening at Gate B2. Sir, we had a situation with ticket verification. Stop. I've been listening. What I need is damage control. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Do you know who Ms. Carter is? Gerald looked at Danielle. Really looked for the first time. He saw a black woman, simply dressed, calm despite everything, but he still didn't see what Morrison meant. No, sir. The pause was heavy with disbelief. Danielle Carter is CEO of Carter Capital Group, our largest strategic partner. Her firm holds the primary contract for our fleet modernization, a $4.9 billion investment funding our entire expansion over the next 5 years. She's not just a passenger. She's the reason half of you still have jobs. The words landed like blows. Gerald staggered. Rick's mouth fell open. Sharon made a strangled sound. The crowd erupted in gasps. Phones zoomed in, capturing the exact moment of realization. "Oh my God," Sharon whispered. Morrison continued. "And you decided to accuse her of fraud, suggest she didn't belong in first class, and attempt to have her forcibly removed. Does that sum it up?" Gerald couldn't speak. Rick looked sick. Sharon was crying, quiet tears streaming as reality crashed over her. Danielle watched with no triumph, only weary validation. This was what it took. Not documentation, not explanations, not patience. It took power, the kind with dollar signs and the ability to affect livelihoods. "Ms. Carter," Morrison's voice shifted, "I cannot express how deeply sorry I am. This is unconscionable." "Mr. Morrison, I appreciate the apology, but this isn't about one incident or 3 employees. This is about a culture that allows this. A system that trains employees to see certain passengers as suspicious by default. You're absolutely right, and we will address this systemically, immediately." A woman in an expensive suit arrived, breathless. Jennifer Clark, Regional Director. She took in the scene and understood immediately. Corporate crisis. "Ms. Carter, I'm Jennifer Clark. I oversee this entire region, and I cannot apologize enough." Danielle looked at her steadily. "Ms. Clark, I've flown through this airport 14 times in the past year. 11 of those times I was subjected to additional screening or scrutiny my white colleagues never faced. I didn't complain. I absorbed it because that's what we're taught. Accommodate, don't make waves, prove yourself over and over." She paused. The teenager live streaming had tears on her face. The lawyer was nodding, recognizing a story she'd lived too many times. "But today I realize silence hasn't changed anything. Patience hasn't changed anything. Being twice as qualified, twice as prepared, none of it changes the fundamental assumption that people like me don't belong." Jennifer looked stricken. "Ms. Carter, please let us make this right." "How? By firing them? They're a symptom. The problem is your system, from training to culture to metrics, creates this outcome." Rick sat with head in hands. Sharon cried quietly. Gerald stood frozen, phone to his ear. Madison's voice, "Danielle, the board will speak with you when ready. They're prepared to take whatever action you deem appropriate." Whatever action she deemed appropriate. Unvarnished power. Danielle looked at the crowd. Passengers who'd become witnesses, allies. She saw her story reflected in their eyes. She looked at Gerald, Rick, Sharon, 3 people confronting consequences they'd never imagined. "Madison, tell the board I'll speak when I land. Right now I have a flight to catch." She looked at Jennifer. "I will board this flight. Then we'll have a longer conversation about how your airline treats passengers who look like me." Jennifer nodded rapidly. "Of course. Whatever you need." Danielle picked up her tote and straightened her shoulders. The crowd parted, many breaking into applause. The lawyer pressed a card into her hand. "If you need a witness, call any time." The elderly woman squeezed her arm. "You were magnificent." At the gate, the attendant, a young black man, scanned her pass with trembling hands. "Ms. Carter," he said quietly, "thank you for not backing down." She smiled. "We shouldn't have to fight this hard to be treated like human beings, but until the system changes, we fight." She walked down the jetway. Behind her, the gate area transformed. The teenager still streaming. News crews would arrive within the hour. Social media exploding with Darius Gate B2 justice. Gerald was being escorted away. Rick and Sharon sat in stunned silence. Jennifer was on damage control. Danielle Carter walked onto that plane with her head high, her dignity intact, and her voice finally, powerfully heard. The explosion wasn't over. It was just beginning. By the time Danielle's flight touched down in Los Angeles, the world had changed. The video had gone viral, spreading with exponential force. The teenager's live stream, 47 million views in 18 hours. News outlets from CNN to BBC picked it up. She Gate B2 justice trending globally. When Danielle turned her phone back on, it exploded with notifications. One message from Madison, marked urgent. "Call me immediately. Everything has accelerated." Madison answered instantly. "The airline's board held emergency session 3 hours ago. Sharon Hendricks, Rick Morrison, and Gerald Patterson, all terminated. Effective immediately. The airline issued a public statement calling their actions A profound violation of company values and federal anti-discrimination law. Danielle closed her eyes briefly. 3 people losing their livelihoods landed with unexpected weight. There's more. Stock dropped 12% at opening. The board requested a meeting about the Carter Capital Partnership's future. The future. They wanted to know if she was pulling her $4.9 billion investment. Kenneth Morrison called directly. They're implementing immediate changes: mandatory anti-bias training, third-party policy review, independent oversight committee. He said they'll do whatever you require. Set up the meeting, but not just executives. I want union representatives, diversity officers, the people who'll actually implement changes. Done. When? Tomorrow, 2 p.m. And Madison? Make sure it's recorded. If they're serious about transparency, let's make it transparent. Danielle scrolled through messages. Most supportive. Friends expressing pride, strangers sharing discrimination stories, but some hostile, accusing her of destroying innocent lives, playing the race card. One message stopped her. From the young black gate attendant: Ms. Carter, I've worked here 6 years. I've seen this happen to dozens of passengers. I've been told to stay quiet. But today, I submitted a formal statement to HR about discriminatory practices I've witnessed. Because of you, I found courage to speak up. This was justice, not just punishment, but empowerment for the voiceless. Her phone rang. Jennifer Clark. Ms. Carter, I've submitted my resignation, effective end of month. Ms. Clark, I didn't ask for that. I know, but I should have known what was happening in my terminals. I failed. Jennifer's voice was thick with emotion. I've been in this industry 23 years. Your words about systems made me realize I've been part of the problem. I'm resigning because it's right. But I'm volunteering to help with reforms, to testify about how biases get embedded in training. If you'll have me, an executive taking genuine responsibility. I'll recommend you as consultant for the Oversight Committee, but this has to be sustained commitment. It will be. I promise. Her phone buzzed. The Department of Transportation was launching an investigation into discriminatory airline practices, using Gate B2 as catalyst. The NAACP called for comprehensive audits. Congressional representatives demanded hearings. One viral moment had become a movement. That evening, Danielle watched news coverage. They showed clips, her face calm and dignified. Rick's expression as he realized who she was, the crowd applauding. But what struck her most was what came after. Stories from other passengers. A black doctor pulled off a flight. A Latina businesswoman questioned about first-class tickets 5 consecutive times. A Muslim family subjected to extra screening so frequently they'd stopped flying. A civil rights attorney on TV. Danielle Carter had power to make her voice heard. But what she's doing with that power, using it for systematic change, not just personal vindication, that's what makes this a watershed moment. Danielle pulled out her laptop and began writing. Not a press statement, but a blueprint. Specific reforms Carter Capital would require from partner companies, anti-discrimination protocols with teeth, independent oversight with real authority, transparent reporting, financial penalties making discrimination expensive, not just embarrassing. She wrote until midnight, fueled by conviction that this moment couldn't be wasted. Sharon, Rick, and Gerald had lost jobs. But if nothing structural changed, they'd be replaced by others with the same biases. True accountability wasn't punishment. It was prevention. Building systems where Gate B2 would be impossible, not because people feared consequences, but because the culture wouldn't allow it. Justice wasn't a moment. It was a process, and it had only just begun. 3 weeks later, Danielle sat across from a journalist in a sunlit conference room. Ms. Carter, you've become the face of a movement. How does that feel? Uncomfortable. Because I'm not special. What happened to me happens daily to countless people without resources to fight back. The only difference is, I had power, and that's why anyone listened. But you used that power. I did. But I shouldn't have needed it. A person's dignity shouldn't depend on net worth. A black woman in first class shouldn't have to be a CEO to be treated with respect. That's what we need to change. The airline implemented sweeping reforms. Is it enough? It's a start. But reform isn't a checklist you complete. It's a commitment you renew daily. The real test comes when cameras are gone. Will the training still be meaningful? Will oversight still have teeth? The Carter Capital Social Equity Initiative? When I pulled the $4.9 billion, people assumed punishment. It was leverage. That money now funds companies meeting equity standards, transparent hiring, pay audits, complaint reviews. Companies wanting our capital must commit to justice, not just profit. What would you say to Sharon, Rick, and Gerald? I'm sorry they lost their jobs. They're products of a system that taught them who belongs. But that doesn't exempt them from responsibility. Their actions had just consequences. She paused. But they can ensure it doesn't happen to others. Sharon reached out. Genuine remorse. She's in anti-racism training, volunteering with advocacy organizations. Redemption requires changed behavior, not just rhetoric. Your message to others facing discrimination without your resources? Document everything. Record, photograph, save emails. Then don't suffer in silence. File complaints. Contact advocacy organizations. Share your story. Your voice matters. She leaned forward. But most importantly, you are not the problem. If you're subjected to scrutiny others aren't, that's not your fault. That's discrimination. You deserve better. You've received awards, speaking invitations. How do you navigate that? By remembering I'm celebrated for refusing degradation. That's a low bar. The real heroes face this without platforms, without viral videos, and keep living with dignity. She looked at the camera. If my story has value, it's because it amplifies theirs. If Gate B2 matters, it's because it made visible what's usually invisible. If I have a platform, I have responsibility to use it for those who haven't been heard. As Danielle walked into the Los Angeles afternoon, she felt the weight of commitment. This wasn't closure. It was the beginning of long work, sustained pressure, transformation after cameras stopped rolling. Justice wasn't a destination. It was a direction, and she was determined to keep walking it. 6 months after Gate B2, Danielle stood before a packed auditorium at a civil rights conference in Atlanta. I didn't want to become a symbol, she began. I wanted to catch a flight and go home, simple, forgettable. But we don't choose which moments define us. Sometimes they choose us. And when they do, we can let them diminish us or galvanize us. The audience leaned forward. If you've witnessed injustice and stayed silent, your voice matters. If you've experienced discrimination and didn't report it, change is possible. If you've walked away because it wasn't your fight, it is. Every one of us has power. Will we use it? Her tone intensified. Here's my challenge. Don't just share this story. Share yours. Don't just watch injustice. Intervene. Stand beside the person being questioned. Record discrimination. Offer to witness. Use your privilege to protect those with less. Because silence isn't neutrality. It's complicity. She smiled knowingly. We make discrimination expensive. In reputation, sustainability, ability to operate. We make it impossible to ignore. The room erupted, but she raised her hand. You don't need to be a CEO to matter. The gate attendant who spoke up, the lawyer who offered witness, the teenager who live-streamed, every voice counts. Power isn't just what you have, it's what you do with it. Your voice, your witness, your refusal to look away. That's power. Her expression became playful. And here's what should terrify every discriminatory system. They can't tell who has it anymore. That passenger they're profiling could be a CEO, could be an attorney, could be someone with millions of followers. They can't know. That uncertainty, that's our advantage. Laughter rippled through the audience. So next time someone tells you that you don't belong, smile, really smile. Because maybe you own that space, or maybe you're just a person living with dignity, and that's enough. Her final words rang clear. Choose justice, not just when convenient, but always. Especially when it's hard, because that's when it matters most. Gate B2 wasn't the end. It was the beginning of our movement. One final pause, voice intimate. And to everyone who ever underestimated someone based on how they looked, who assumed power had a particular appearance, her smile turned mischievous. You've been warned. The auditorium erupted, standing ovation, energy of people feeling seen, validated, empowered. Justice wasn't a moment. It was a choice, made every day, in every interaction where power and dignity intersected. Choose justice. Dignity isn't negotiable. Justice isn't optional. And power? It's earned by lifting others up.